The science of environmental psychology. When you walk into a space that immediately feels right, what exactly is happening within you?
The gentle exhale, the softening of your shoulders, the clearing of mental fog. These responses aren't mere coincidence or subjective preference, but manifestations of a complex dialogue between your biology and your surroundings.
This conversation, once understood primarily through intuition and tradition, has now been illuminated through decades of scientific inquiry, revealing the intricate ways our environments shape our inner lives. The emergence of a discipline, environmental psychology's journey as a formal discipline, began in the mid-20th century, though its roots stretch much deeper into human understanding. The systematic study emerged when researchers began observing what they called behavior settings, the consistent patterns of human activity that emerged in specific physical contexts. This pioneering work was led by Roger Barker and his colleagues, who developed the concept of behavior settings as part of ecological psychology around the mid-20th century. Barker's groundbreaking work demonstrated that certain environments reliably elicited certain behaviors, regardless of which individuals occupied them. The science began with a simple yet profound observation. When researchers documented behaviors in spaces as diverse as schools, stores, and playing fields, they discovered that the setting predicted behavior more accurately than knowing the individual personalities involved. This challenged the prevailing psychological focus on internal traits and opened the door to exploring context as a primary influence on human experience. This initial research spark ignited broader exploration in the 1960s through studies examining personal space, territorial behavior, and the psychological dimensions of urban environments. This work coincided with growing public concern about the psychological impacts of rapid urban development, architectural modernism, and environmental degradation, creating fertile ground for a new field exploring the reciprocal relationship between people and their surroundings. By the 1970s, environmental psychology had crystallized as a distinct discipline, marked by the publication of key works such as Prashansky, Idelson, and Rivlin's Environmental Psychology in 1970, and the founding of specialized journals like Environment and Behavior in 1969. The field brought together insights from architecture, urban planning, psychology, anthropology, and neuroscience to understand the profound ways environments shape human experience. Today, this multidisciplinary approach continues to evolve through increasingly sophisticated research methods, from neuroimaging studies utilizing functional MRI, fMRI, and electroencephalography, EEG, revealing brain responses to different environments, to wearable sensors tracking physiological data in real-world settings, and large-scale population studies documenting connections between environmental quality and mental health outcomes. Key mechanisms of environmental influence. How exactly do your surroundings influence your psychological state? Research has identified several distinct pathways through which this influence unfolds. Sensory stimulation. Your environment constantly bombards your nervous system with sensory information that triggers biological responses, often below the threshold of conscious awareness. Light patterns regulate your circadian rhythms through melatonin production, directly impacting mood, energy, and sleep quality. Noise activates your sympathetic nervous system, potentially triggering stress responses that persist even after you've consciously tuned out the sound. Air quality affects cognitive performance through subtle changes in oxygen saturation and inflammatory responses. Temperature influences not only physical comfort, but decision-making capacity and social behavior. These sensory inputs aren't simply detected, they're transformed into neurochemical signals that cascade through your body, altering hormone levels, neural activation patterns, immune responses, and cognitive functioning. When you feel inexplicably tense in a crowded, noisy cafe or refreshed after walking through a park, you're experiencing the biological consequences of these sensory conversations. Cognitive processing demands. Environments vary dramatically in the cognitive load they impose. Some spaces require constant attentional filtering, mentally screening out irrelevant stimuli like background conversations, visual clutter, or movement. Others permit what psychologists call effortless attention, allowing your cognitive resources to replenish rather than deplete. Consider the mental effort required in different settings. Moving through a busy urban intersection demands continuous high-alert processing, tracking multiple moving objects, filtering noise, navigating obstacles. A woodland path, while still information-rich, presents patterns your brain processes more efficiently, allowing attentional resources to restore rather than deplete. This variation in cognitive demands helps explain why certain environments leave you mentally exhausted while others rejuvenate your thinking. The concept of attention restoration theory proposes that natural environments support cognitive recovery precisely because they engage attention in less demanding ways than built environments, particularly urban settings. Affordances and constraints. Each environment presents a unique combination of possibilities and limitations, what environmental psychologists call affordances and constraints. A well-designed kitchen affords efficient meal preparation. A poorly arranged one constrains it. An open plaza affords social gathering. A narrow corridor constrains it. These environmental features shape behavior not through force, but through invitation and resistance, creating paths of least resistance that guide your actions in subtle yet powerful ways. This perspective reveals how environments can either support or undermine your intentions and goals. When your surroundings make desired behaviors difficult, like attempting focused work in a distracting space, the resulting friction creates stress and depletes motivation. Conversely, when environments seamlessly support your intentions, they create a sense of flow and competence that enhances psychological well-being. Symbolic and associative meaning beyond their immediate sensory properties and functional characteristics, environments communicate through layers of symbolic meaning and personal association. High ceilings historically symbolized importance and transcendence in sacred architecture, and research confirms they still evoke sensations of freedom and abstract thinking. Natural materials like wood and stone carry associations with authenticity and permanence that influence perception regardless of their physical properties. Personal spaces decorated with meaningful objects create a sense of continuity and identity that supports psychological security. These symbolic conversations operate through what neuroscience identifies as predictive processing, your brain's continuous generation of expectations based on past experience. When entering a library, your nervous system anticipates quiet, triggering preparatory calm. A hospital corridor may activate stress responses based on previous associations with illness or uncertainty. These predictions aren't simply intellectual, but embodied anticipations that prepare your entire system for what the environment might demand. We carry internal maps created from every space we've ever inhabited. These maps aren't just mental, they're inscribed in our bodies as physiological expectations. When a new environment matches or violates these expectations, the resulting sense of harmony or discord shapes our entire experience of that space. Social regulation environments powerfully shape social behavior through features that either facilitate or inhibit human connection. Seating arrangements, whether chairs in a circle or in rows, influence conversation patterns. Acoustics determine whether comfortable dialogue is possible. Spatial boundaries define psychological territories that influence interaction. These environmental social cues operate so effectively that they often override verbal instructions. People consistently interact differently in a classroom arranged for lecture versus one set up for discussion, regardless of what they're told to do. Studies in behavioral economics and social psychology demonstrate that even minor environmental tweaks can significantly shift social patterns. Hand sanitizer stations increase cooperative behavior. The presence of flowers enhances pro-social actions. Windows with natural views reduce social aggression. These effects emerge not through conscious reflection on the environment, but through subtle shifts in felt security, cognitive resources, and physiological state that then influence social perception and behavior. The neurological evidence advances in neuroscience have transformed our understanding of environmental psychology by revealing the specific brain mechanisms through which environments influence experience. Functional MRI studies demonstrate that different environments activate distinct neural networks, with measurable consequences for cognition, emotion, and behavior. Research reveals that environments rich in curved forms activate different neural pathways than those dominated by sharp angles, with the former associated with approach responses and the latter with vigilance and potential avoidance. Studies show that exposure to natural scenes engages the default mode network, brain regions associated with calm reflection, creativity, and positive mood, while urban scenes preferentially activate networks associated with directed attention and potential threat processing. Perhaps most striking are findings demonstrating that environmental exposures can actually alter brain structure over time. Research has found that urban upbringing was associated with increased amygdala activity, the brain's alarm system, in response to social stress, suggesting that urbanization may fundamentally shape neural development related to stress processing. Conversely, longitudinal research indicates that regular nature exposure is associated with beneficial changes in brain regions involved in attention, emotional regulation, and stress response. These neurological findings tell us that the environment-psychology connection isn't simply subjective or cultural, but is grounded in measurable brain processes. Different surroundings literally create different brain states, with cascading effects on everything from stress hormone production to immune function to cognitive performance. This neural evidence helps explain why environmental influences often operate below conscious awareness. Many environmental effects trigger subcortical brain regions that process information faster than conscious thought, creating what researchers call precognitive appraisals that shape your emotional state before you've had time to consciously evaluate a space. By the time you form a considered opinion about an environment, your nervous system has already generated a complex response to it. Cultural and individual variations. While research confirms universal aspects of environmental response, humans across cultures show stress reduction in natural settings and heightened alertness in novel environments. Environmental psychology also reveals significant variation in how different people and cultures relate to surroundings. Cross-cultural research demonstrates that personal space requirements vary substantially across societies. People from Mediterranean cultures typically maintain closer interpersonal distances than those from Northern European backgrounds. Japanese architectural traditions emphasize different spatial values than Western approaches, with greater comfort in enclosed spaces and different optimal room proportions. Traditional Islamic design prioritizes multisensory richness, intricate visual patterns, water features, garden scents, reflecting cultural values around sensory experience that differ from Western minimalism. These cultural variations aren't superficial preferences, but deep expressions of collective environmental wisdom. Each cultural tradition has developed sophisticated understanding of how environments affect human experience. Though these insights take different forms reflecting distinct histories and values, individual differences further diversify environmental response patterns. Research by Dr. Elaine Aron suggests that approximately 15 to 20% of the population possesses high sensory processing sensitivity, heightened awareness of subtle environmental stimuli that creates both greater vulnerability to overwhelming settings and enhanced appreciation of harmonious ones. Studies indicate that introverts typically require lower stimulation environments than extroverts, with measurably different optimal arousal levels. Neurodivergent individuals, particularly those with autism spectrum conditions or ADHD, often experience environmental stimuli with distinct intensity and pattern recognition that creates unique environmental needs. Age introduces another dimension of variation, with environmental needs shifting across the lifespan. Children show more consistent benefits from access to active play spaces, while adolescents often seek environments supporting both social interaction and personal identity expression. Older adults demonstrate enhanced well-being in environments that balance stimulation with predictability and support sensory changes associated with aging. Understanding these variations isn't about categorizing people, but about recognizing that environmental responses exist on multiple continua. Rather than seeking universal ideal environments, the field increasingly focuses on understanding diverse patterns of person-environment interaction and creating adaptable settings that support various needs. From science to lived experience, the science of environmental psychology ultimately circles back to your personal experience, illuminating patterns you've likely felt but perhaps never named. The sudden clarity of thought when walking in nature, the inexplicable tension in certain buildings, the peace that descends in particular rooms of your home. These aren't random fluctuations, but meaningful signals in the ongoing dialogue between your biology and your surroundings. By understanding the mechanisms through which environments influence you, you gain new agency in this relationship. You learn to recognize when mood shifts might reflect environmental factors rather than purely internal states. You develop awareness of your unique environmental preferences and sensitivities. You acquire a vocabulary for articulating how spaces affect you, transforming vague impressions into specific observations that guide more intentional environmental choices. Environmental awareness doesn't replace other forms of psychological understanding, but complements them. Just as we've learned to pay attention to how foods affect our physical health, we're now developing greater literacy around how environments influence our mental well-being. This awareness isn't about controlling every aspect of your surroundings, an impossible task, but about making more conscious choices when possible and adapting more skillfully when necessary. As we continue our exploration, this scientific foundation will support increasingly practical applications, translating research insights into tangible strategies for creating environments that nurture your psychological health. The growing field of environmental psychology doesn't just explain the hidden dialogue between space and self, but helps you participate in this conversation with greater awareness, intention, and skill.